Please be advised that the information presented herein is for educational purposes only. It is strongly recommended that listeners should seek guidance from qualified paid professionals of their choosing before acting upon any information or materials discussed. Hey everyone, welcome again to Real Estate News Unpacked. I'm your co-host Marcel, your mortgage money guy, alongside Ronald, your 5-star Michelin designer. All things multiplex designers. We've got a good session today, lots to unpack. First thing, Carney continues the tariff fight with an elbows down approach. What does that mean for us? Recession warnings continue. Home sales up in July. Developers continue to push for relief. All things development, from approvals to DCs. And last but not least, how do Ontario cities rank? The Municipal Scorecard Review. All this in this episode of Real Estate News Unpacked. Ron, let's get into it. What do you got for us today?
Awesome, bro. Appreciate it, man. Thanks for the intro. That was really awesome. Hey, this week is going to be pretty awesome. I can see some just wonderful articles coming through, and you can see it up on the screen. We're looking at new developer alliance. So some of the top tier developers in Ontario have formed an alliance, and they intend to push the feds for housing policy overhaul. And these are some big names, right? These are some huge names, Diamond Corp, Madame, Menkes, like there, and a ton load of them. There's about 13 of them, I believe, that's within this alliance. And they essentially are asking, up on the headlines, this is probably going to be the most controversial, but to remove foreign buyers ban, like let's exempt that, right?
Yeah. This is the result of them getting squeezed right now in the market, and then saying, "Hey, man, like we got to survive. We got to play here. You got to ease up on some of these rules, right? Like we got to be able to sell to people elsewhere that want to buy. Like we have to be able to sell to someone,
That's right.
even if it means we're selling to foreign buyers, right?"
And that's the reality. Shovels get in the ground when buyers buy. Like, make no mistake. Right?
Exactly. That's the reality, right? So I don't disagree. This push is almost inevitable. You see this all the time. Once the biggest in the industry gets squeezed, this is the result, right? So
yeah, so some big muscle, right? So these are heavy hitters. These guys are developing. They are basically bringing housing to Ontario, to Canada as a whole. And if these guys aren't building, you can almost be certain that we're going to stay in this crisis, right? We're going to stay in this crisis, and this crisis can be prolonged if some of these reliefs don't come true. So what they highlighted here on this particular article that was done by Stories is that pre-construction sales in the first quarter of 2025 were down 89% in Toronto, Great GTA, 77% in the GVA, right, and 51% on the Ottawa region. These are huge markets. These markets, as you know, Marcel, they drive a lot of investment, a lot of investors buy in these large cities because growth, the potential for market appreciation is greater in these cities, right?
Yeah. Also, the bigger picture for me is more economic, and these builders employ a lot of people, right? They're the lifeline of the construction industry.
Exactly.
If their machines are not moving, and shovels aren't in the ground, then overall the construction industry is in trouble, right? So.
Exactly. And those machines need to keep going. So in fact, if you look at this here, you'll see where there is, I guess, it remains weak. Some of these cities remains weak. So there's like 6 major cities, right? We just listed the first 3. The second half of this sort of big 6 cities, Edmonton, Calgary, Montreal, those, even though there has been some softened sales, they still remain less vulnerable, right? They're less vulnerable to some of the impact that we have seen from the previous mention. And combined, these 6 urban centers like account for over 50% of Canada's housing starts, meaning the projects that are actually shovels in the ground. 50% within 6 cities, right? And I don't know what the population is, but I suspect it's probably also reflective of the population as well, right? They probably hold about 50% of the population within Canada. And if they want to see the market rebound or remain stable, these markets need to do well. So that's why these developers are now coming forward and saying, look, we would like to push the feds to understand that if we don't start developing and implementing some of these like measures, we are essentially going to end up in a huge slump. Right?
Yeah. No, like I said, it's the point being there is their start is vital for economic recovery within construction and real estate. So, yeah.
Yeah, so here are some there's about like 13, maybe 10 recommendations, and I can post a link in the description here. But this is the top 4 that they considered, for lack of a better word, low-hanging fruits. Like they think in terms of speed of implementation, these 4 things can be implemented quickly. So I'm just going to go through this because we have done a number of these discussions in past podcasts, and we can also link to those as well, right? So number 1, this is what they think is a low-hanging fruit, is GST rebates. So as you know, GST rebates, just in a nutshell, it has been sort of revamped, and now there is a phase out from 1 million to 1.5 versus from $450,000 previously, right? So they're asking that this first-time home buyers rebate be extended to not only first-time home buyers, but to everyone buying.
All buyers. Yeah.
Right? All home buyers.
That just makes sense.
Yeah.
That just makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You got to unlock that one. That's an easy low-hanging, just flick of the switch unlock there, right? That totally makes sense. What's next?
This is Canada, man. Flick of the switch, like it means like, you know, how many developers and politicians it takes us to change a light bulb. It's probably that's kind of the question there. It's going to take a long while for them to flick that switch, but I do agree with you. It's a low-hanging fruit, one that could be addressed. From a DC standpoint, development charges, we talked about this as well. Development charges, let's just remove it overall. But what these developers are asking for, which I think is a little bit suspicious here, is like, let's actually see how we might just, shift the line item from the developer's feasibility study to the purchaser's buying decision. Let's move development charges directly to the buyers, right? What's your take on that? Is that going to encourage more development, or is that going to encourage more buying?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. That could be messy. I don't see that as a positive. Like, I see it as a positive for the developer's side, but for the buyer's side,
yeah.
I'm gonna do that math, and now I'm gonna, like, that's got to be reflective in the purchase price, right? To a degree, right? So even though it's technically being passed along, I just think, just from a very psychological perspective, if you see that extra bill, it's like, on your final bill, which is already massive when you get the statement of adjustments, that could be a real deterrent, especially in a market now where people are kind of, condos have taken a very strong hit to the chin. I'm not too sure that's a good idea. I think that one needs to go back to the boardroom and with some rethinking. I think it's better done as either a deferral or eliminated on the developer's side. I don't think pushing it to the buyer's side I don't think that'll come across positive for developers and equal more sales, which is what you need, right? You need more sales right now.
Exactly. And I think, obviously that's going to be reflected, I believe, at the very tail end of this whole development process. But to that point, you can see how there's one measure where we're expecting to, remove GST. So we're trying to remove or reduce the the tax burden on a project, but then we're just gonna replace that really with the development like line item, right? Like let's put a development charge line item on there. So again, there's one step forward, one step back. We have gone nowhere, right? Again, the other item that I wanted to kind of mention here, and this one is probably the most controversial because I believe it's back in 2022, we saw that the government introduced, because we had such a heated market, they introduced this foreign buyers ban or tax, I think it's buyers ban, and a whole bunch of other measures for foreign buyers that essentially discourage foreign buyers from purchasing. Now, as you can see here, that they're asking for an exemption from that so that they can essentially begin to build more new and put more pre-construction product on the market, right? So this is something that may help, but is this actually solving a housing crisis? Because with foreign home buyers, what are they actually doing? They're taking product off the market for primarily investment purposes. I don't know. What's your take on this here, Marcel? This is kind of controversial, and I don't know how you as a professional mortgage lender and developer, like how are you? What's your view on this?
Yeah, my view on this is the foreign buyer ban should be. I think that should be lifted. I think you want foreign capital to always be in your markets. I just think you need more control over it. Right. So if someone is in fact a foreign buyer, you're registering that control. You're watching that those units don't sit vacant. Right. So I think a vacancy tax is still in effect, like that continues. But if the foreign money flows in for the purpose of purchasing the real estate, based on where we're at today, I think that's a good unlock in the interim. And maybe it's a little bit of a short-term solution to give us a bit of a boost. Just get some money flowing back into the country, get some liquidity moving in that condo market.
Yeah.
And maybe you pull the rug in 3 years when the confidence gets back. But I think you need a little bit of influx into the market. You need a little bit of a push to get things going. And this is no different than what happens or used to happen in the stock market, in the early days, right? Like the big investment bank houses when the stock market would slow down or it looks like it's going to be a crash, the big investment houses would get together and they give it a little push, they give it a little influx, and then everyone gets confidence again and starts to buy, right? So I think this could be a similar analogy. And it could bode useful in the short term, but really got to monitor that, have some good measures in place for who's a foreign buyer versus who's not, and units sitting empty and all that kind of stuff.
Well, again, I will just say this seems definitely developer focused because it is coming from a developers alliance, right? And I'm sure if you were to put some homeowner associations in there, some real estate investors associations in there, it would be a whole different conversations, right? But again, too many chefs in the kitchen, it doesn't really help for the end product, right? The dish itself. And I think as someone who kind of looks at a lot of these type of policies coming through, and this, by the way, is not excluded from their list of things that need to be looked at, but it's not one of the short-term things they seem to think could be addressed. And what I'm referring to here is basically development planning, timelines, and so forth. So when it comes to development, of course, nothing gets built until it gets approved, right? So it has to be approved by the city. And I seem to think this is a low-hanging fruit. But with that said, it does take a lot of red tape to be cut in order to make this happen. And there is a 2024 Municipal Benchmark Study. So for those who don't know what this benchmark study is, it is essentially a scorecard, right, that rates or ranks municipalities throughout Canada based on their ability to get permits approved, planning approved in a timely and efficient manner. So there's a ranking based on these municipalities across Canada. And what is interesting to see here, if you look at this table that's up on the screen, and we can post a link to the actual document and this table on in the description, is I've highlighted some columns and I've highlighted some rows. So from a column standpoint, it's in blue. You can see it's at the bottom. That's the bottom tier, the bottom performers, the bottom of the barrel, the bottom scrapers. And the interesting thing that I want to note here, Marcel.
Those rows, I think you meant, but those
Yes.
rows are all Ontario-based cities.
That's right.
Where if you look above, your Alberta, you're out east, Halifax, Regina, Calgary, Moncton, Charlottetown, Surrey, like you're out east, you're out west.
You're out west.
And some central. Ontario's really, and I'm sure this is probably not the full list, but in this top, what is this, 20
Top 23, because to your point,
Yeah.
Montreal isn't on this list. I don't seem to see it in there. Maybe, so probably is this not a complete list, or maybe they're just so far at the bottom of the list, right?
Yeah. So we got low ranks and we've got high fees.
That's right. So the column that is highlighted in yellow, that's the ranking from 1 to 23. So starting with the top, which is Edmonton, ending at the bottom, which is Bradford, right? Which is an Ontario city. So one of the other tip points that I wanted to highlight here is that development charges, which are sort of highlighted in red. So I'll just kind of I'll swap on over to that particular slide. And what I wanted to show here is that the bottom portion of this chart, which is highlighted and shown on the screen, you can see those red cells that are highlighted. They're showing essentially development fees. And where development fees are the highest, timelines are the longest, right?
Yeah.
This is a correlation that I think really needs to be looked at. And this is one of the things that I think these developers, should really pay attention to here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I was a developer, and that's one of the reasons I put my pen down, I tell my story, the timelines for your entitlements will destroy you. They'll erode your returns. It's simply a risk that just doesn't make sense. There's so many other better investments or places to put your money that don't yield that type of risk, right? So that's always been a major problem with development here in Ontario and in the city. And you can see, in relation to Canada, how low our cities rank. And then if you took that and you compared it against, maybe places in the US, it'll be even worse, right? So yeah, definitely, that's always been a huge contention. I'm sure that's something that's on their list. I think it's a little bit harder to get changed or lobby. It's a more complex issue, like it's a very complicated issue.
Yeah. And what I'll say is that we have discussed this on many recordings before. There's lots of bills, there's lots of policies, lots of changes to laws that have come through lately that have improved this, and we'll chat a little bit about that, right, Marcel? But what it is we are seeing is that most cities are now starting to address these deficiencies. So we've seen timelines compressed. We have also seen DCs slashed, right, which impacts a huge amount of these fees that we're now looking at here, right? Like so there's a lot of great changes that are coming through, and this is something that we'll actually look at. In fact, so this is a chart that I pulled. Hopefully it's large enough. Hopefully it's legible. You can see that there. But this chart is actually from Calgary. I wanted to point out here a few things. One is that Calgary is actually hitting their targets. So Calgary actually was assigned a target and that they agreed to, and they are actually hitting their targets. So in fact,
and this is the housing Housing Affordability Fund target.
The
you're
Housing
referring to, right?
Accelerator Fund, exactly. So
Housing Accelerator Fund.
yes, that's right. So there was a target that they committed to, and now they are hitting their targets, and of course they are receiving the funds that they agreed to. And maybe in another recording, we can do a comparison into the ambitious sort of policies that they have put in place, and some of the really sort of progressive, steps that they're taking to improve their timelines. Hence the reason why, you can get permits approved within weeks in Calgary for significant developments that, in comparison to other centers, is not even there. But what I want to point out here is that we're looking at a chart from Calgary that shows red and gray. So the red being what the target was, and whether the gray being if they met the target. And what I want to highlight at the very top, you just have like you have a column or a row that talks about affordability. So the targets were like sort of underperformed there. Multi-units, this also exceeded, and this is the second red and gray from the top. This sort of exceeded. So in terms of their housing growth targets, they actually fell short even on a missing middle standpoint, which is the third column, right in smack in the middle. It's kind of they fell short. Where it is they truly excelled, and this is where I think developers are leaning in, and they're saying, well, this is where it is we need to do better across all centers. Calgary seems to be doing really well. This is in transit-oriented type communities, TOC communities, right? Multifamily. So they have completely shut past their requirements, and hence the reason why they're receiving funding. So overall, as a weighted average, you can see how they have surpassed. This is the longest line at the very bottom of the chart. They have surpassed their target by a bit, right? Which a lot of other cities are actually struggling with to do today. So this is something that I think needs to be looked into. And I want to show a comparison. But do you see where I'm going with this here, Marcel? Like you can see how
yeah. So if I have my developer hat on, the way I look at that is, if I'm ranking where I want to invest, where I want to develop, where I want to put my money and my investors' money and form a strategy around, I want to be in cities that are hitting those targets, right? Therefore, they're not going to be giving the money back, right? Like we talked about with
important.
Your friends at Oakville,
Yeah.
right? And I'm gonna, based on the amount of money, obviously you want to see like what that money is going towards, right?
Yeah.
Like, is it going towards, infrastructure, housing, transportation, what, obviously focus on what it, what most benefits you as a developer, which would be all of the above, but mainly transportation. And if I'm looking at that, like I'm using that as a measure to determine where I would want to be. And Calgary, from that perspective, is looking good, right? Like those are the types of cities that that will have that long-term potential, long-term growth.
Yeah, and here's one of the things that I again just pointing out. I agree with you 100%. Like, you want to work in a city where it is they obviously have progressive housing policies. This is why timelines are truncated, and this is why they're actually hitting their targets and getting the funding. And while there's a lot of pushback on DCs and a lot of policies we're seeing happening in Ontario, so Ontario specifically, not Alberta, but we're seeing a lot of policy changes happening in Ontario, is to hopefully drive that efficiency that we are seeing in Alberta, right? So this is very important. And going back here to my initial thought about this developer alliance pushing the feds, you can see that these developers actually they do big, like they're putting up buildings with 2,000 1,000 units and so forth. They want to do these TOC type developments, right? This is where it is most impact could be made. This is why they want foreign buyers to come back into the market. Shovels don't hit the ground until a certain amount of units are pre-sold, right? There's pre-sales that are needed for these things to happen. So with that said, I am very optimistic by what it is I'm seeing coming out of Calgary. But I'm also very optimistic as well, Marcel, here. I'm very optimistic with what it is I'm seeing in Toronto. So, 3 years ago, Toronto average development timeline approval would have been like 2 years, right? A year and a half to 2 years. No,
Yeah.
this is a significant drop. This is a significant drop.
Average business days building permit intake to issuance. Yeah. So this is building permit intakes. This is not rezoning and site plan, right?
Rezoning and site plan have some variance in there, and there's lots of charts, by the way. Again, can also link to it. Toronto have a great dashboard. In fact, most cities today have a great dashboard.
That stat there is, I've applied for permits.
Yes,
I've gotten it now, right?
That's right. So you
Right.
applied and it's issued. That's that timeline. This used to take, again, this is average across all different type of assets. This is building permits across the board, right? Whether it be institutional, commercial, industrial, residential, right? But this is an average. It's just kind of a good benchmark just to look at. And what you're seeing is this basically timelines is a percentage. It's a fraction of what it used to be, right? And this is bodes well for where it is we're heading. And I think there needs to be more emphasis on this. I understand that there's a lot of red tape surrounding this and a lot of, probably political type conversations that has to have a lot of lobbying. But this is where I think the most impact will come. It's kind of like you have this big project on your desk, right? You have this big project that you need to do, but you keep nibbling on the little things that does not really move the needle, right? This is going to move the needle, because if we can take a development that would take 5 years to get approved, go through all the zoning amendments, OP amendments, all these different things, right? If we can truncate that to, let's say, 1 year, which I don't see why it's not possible. Like, we have a lot of educated, intelligent people doing these things. In fact, AI can probably do some of it now, right? So, man, like, we should be ripping through these, getting buildings built faster, and that's what's going to move the needle the furthest. Is not all these little policy shifts with DCs and moving line items from one stakeholder to another, or one party to another. This is about building buildings, getting things approved quickly, and then getting them shovels in the ground and getting projects completed.
Yeah, no, I do agree with that. I think, but I would say that it's a combination of everything.
That's right.
And this whole approvals thing is something I kind of looked into pretty in depth. There's a lot of manual processes still being done. There's a lot of layered hierarchy decision making that's still happening. So I think the use of technology and innovation in this space could really help, and the reshuffling of decision making internally, I think, is another big thing that'll help the unlock there. But yeah, I know that's something that municipalities are working on. They're doing their best to alleviate, but that in where we're at right now as a result of the condo market, I would say that this needs to garner a lot more attention and a lot more action.
I like that. That's a great way to sum it up. Just need more action on this particular file. And I will say the City of Toronto is doing a phenomenal job. They have implemented the EHON, which is expanding housing options in neighborhoods. And this is something that I think has great long-term impact, but also there's a significant short-term impact here. And the map that I have up here, again, is one of those maps that I think very interesting. I hope you find it as interesting as I do, Marcel, right? But
yeah.
Let me just give a quick overview here. So this is essentially residential units with issued building permits within the wards, the 25 wards within Toronto. So we're not looking at anywhere else. We're just looking at Toronto. They do have a lot of great data sets that kind of outline, and we can dive really deep into some of the nuances, like where units are being built, what developments, what permits were issued, and so forth. But I just really high level here. If you look, you'll see the red. The red is basically the areas that on this map that shows where the most development is happening. And, the question obviously might be asked, like, what type of developments are happening? Well, before we actually get into that, let's just do a little quick overlay, right? It's a really quick overlay here. So we can see the red, dark red is basically the most development. And the light blue is essentially, or the sky blue, or the cyan is basically where it is there's the least amount of development happening here, right? There could be much questions asked, but I want to point out here, if you look at, there is that area within the Toronto East York Council. And I know we had conversations about this in the past, Marcel. You're like, this is not East York. This is really how it's defined by the city. That Toronto East York sort of council area, you can see this is where most of the development is happening. But I want to point out within there, you can see there's a number 40. That number 40 is essentially like 40, and we're seeing 55. There's Spadina, and that's Toronto, like center. Those areas are actually really slow. There's very little building permits being issued within those areas.
That's the high-rise corridor.
Exactly, the high-rise corridor. Why are now developers going? As you can see, Toronto being one of the biggest, most robust development market within Canada, you can see why now there's this alliance being formed to sort of stop the hemorrhaging. Because right now if this continues on, we don't see building permits issued within these, and this is TFC areas, right? This is where a lot of the transit
those are
is.
residential permits, though, right?
Those are all residential permits. Like this would be
So
residential
there
here.
isn't much residential in that area.
That's right.
So if you go back to the map, you'll see what interests me about this map is, where some of the policies have unlocked, even though it's super new, like North Scarborough at number 10 in the top right there. Not much going on, but you've got some policy as of right, 6 units up there. Now, granted, that's brand new, so that's not going to be reflected in these numbers. But
That's right.
it'd be interesting to see what that looks like a year from now, right? The South Scarborough 386, it's probably the largest number on the chart. That is it's very interesting that there's actually that much happening down there, and that really leads me to want to understand further what's going on there. I would imagine it's a lot of basement suites, and maybe what else would you say? I don't think it's multiplexes out there.
Well, it's not multiplexes, because to your point, where that number 10 is over to the far right, that's North Scarborough. Right, and then I believe that's South Scarborough down there, where we're seeing a lot of permits being issued. I think it would have been really great had we seen the sixplex expansion into that area where there's already a lot of building permit activity.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Because obviously there's people, there's a reason why, and we'll have to dig deeper into the data there, but there's a reason why there's more activity there, whether it be transit, whether it be roads, whether it be infrastructure.
Well, it's not transit,
right?
Yeah, it's not transit.
Yeah.
It's definitely not transit, because that area of the city is isolated from transit. I think that's the opportunity for Toronto. So you can see where transit is in that midsection. That's right. Where the most amount of combined activity is happening. That's where transit is, right?
That's right.
And then you've got the anomaly there with South Etobicoke. Lots of activity out there as well. But yeah, no, I think in future it'd be good to dive deeper, especially with these outliers, in South Scarborough and South Etobicoke, to see what types of permits are being done out there. I would imagine South Etobicoke is probably more multiplexes, and South Scarborough, like you said, is probably more basement suites or whatnot.
For the sake of this definition here, I'll say, so multiplexes being 4 units or less, right? And I'll just say a houseplex would be 4 units or more, right, between 4 to 10 units, right? And you're right, like in the areas where there's a lot of a lot of red, right? So where the red exists, that's where multiplexes have existed, and that's where there's a lot of just uptake. Like in fact, most of the clients that we work with today is either in Etobicoke South, right? Or they're actually within that ward there, Davenport, Rosedale,
Yeah, that whole central
High
corridor.
Park. Yeah.
Yeah, central corridor area.
Yeah, that's right. So that's where most people are purchasing these properties for obvious reasons. There's it's kind of a young, hip, kind of rental type sort of market within those, right?
It's the transit nodes. Those are the main transit nodes are, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's
Absolutely.
naturally where you're going to get development. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess maybe to wrap my thought up here, I really think that, this whole alliance is designed to push federal government to make these moves because we are seeing a decline in permit activity throughout major centers. And if this continues on, it's simply we may get out of an economic potential crisis, right? But we may still be very well, neck deep in a housing crisis if this doesn't turn around today.
Yeah, no, and that's a perfect segue to what I have to talk about today as well. So in line with your points, Ron, this is a great segue, as I mentioned, because there are some challenges. I'm going to deliver a little bit of bad news here, right? Like this is not all, peaches and rosebuds, right? So, first of all, let's take a look at what happened as a result of last week. So this week where it was last Friday, we're August 8th today. And last Friday, we got hit with increased tariffs. So we got to keep an eye on tariffs, right? I know people are getting bored of this, but you really got to keep an eye on this because right now it's driving a lot of decision making with the Bank of Canada and the economy, right? So in this case, Carney says he'll look at opportunities to remove tariffs on US. So whereas most people thought, it was elbows up and we were going to retaliate as a result of the increase that we got hit with, I think this is where Carney's economic experience is really coming to play. And he's taking a kind of an overarching kind of 3,000 foot view of the economy and going, okay, it may not be right now, may not be the time to punch back necessarily. Let's take a look at things. We're not exactly doing as well as we could be. So let's really take a close look at the economy, because a punch back could actually hurt our economy more. Is essentially what he's saying in this case. Ron, what are your thoughts? Should we be punching back? Is it elbows up or is this like
elbows up always sounds like the thing to do, right? It's like, let's go elbows up. But I also think this is also not an elbows up scenario, but it's also not a bending the knee scenario, right? So it's we're sometimes always polarizing here. It's either we're bending the knee or we're actually elbows up. But I think what we're seeing here is kind of the wisdom of an economist coming into play, and he's like, what? Let's look at the war, right? And again, like not to say like we're in a war with the U.S., but for lack of a better word, let's look at the outcomes, the overall outcome, and see whether or not it's better to kind of just fold my cards on this particular bet here, right? And let's see how that works out. And I think that's really where Carney is at, Prime Minister Carney. He is really looking at, do we sacrifice this battle to ultimately win the war, which is ultimately to rebuild that relationship with the U.S., right?
Yeah, this is a long play. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think this is the right decision based on where we are right now with the economy, right? Like, I think this is the right decision. Oxford, Canada already in recession, but defense spending to lift growth and bond yields. So, we talked about, the recession, that was coming, Q2, Q3, continued no growth, right?
Yeah,
so it's more of a technical recession. I think kind of people are feeling the recession as well. There's a general sentiment. There's still a general ode of uncertainty. However, like we're gonna look at July, what happened in July in real estate, and see, you know, what's actually happening with people, and you know, whether or not that uncertainty has lifted. So just going back to the report that Oxford's kind of put out here, we see that higher yields put pressure on mortgage rates. So you know, we talked about the effect of the bond yield market in a previous episode, which we can link to. But really, you know, as the article here states, right, lenders across the country have been steadily increasing rates across various terms in recent weeks, reflecting higher funding costs and economic uncertainty. So you can see that as the bond yields go up, that affects the fixed rates, right? So the fixed rates are going to go up. Once again, we explained that on a past episode. We'll link it here. All about how bond yields work. We broke it down. We unpacked that for you. That's what we do here. So the Oxford report talks about, you know, the policy rate kind of remaining the same, and that's really going to be based on growth and inflation, right? What happens there? So if we go to the next slide, so this outlook snapshot, Ron, I don't know if anything jumps out for you in this outlook snapshot. Let me know your thoughts.
Yeah.
2026. Really, we're looking at 2026. I think a lot of people like to jump to the rosy 3% GDP growth that's presumed in 2027, but like I think we got to get through 2026 first, right?
Well, I'm gonna put on my economist hat and kind of sit behind my crystal ball, because I want to look till 3027. You know, this is like, how are we why are we looking till 2027 when there's an immediate risk like right in front of us? There's a wall which is circled, right? That wall is circled right in front of us. I think this is kind of where the focus need to be. But somehow 2027 is listed there. I guess just to bring some optimism to this whole table, right?
Well, I don't know whether it was done to bring optimism, but maybe just show context and perspective. But where we're at now is 2025. And we can see that what this chart is saying is GDP growth is going to slow into 2026, right? So
That's right.
Considerably, almost in half.
That's right.
And just for perspective, a healthy economy is anywhere between 2 to 3%. So 0.4, that's definitely recession, right? Like there's no question there. That is very, very slow economic output. So then we've got on the next CPI inflation, you get the next column is inflation up. So you got growth down, so slowed growth, inflation up. And then unemployment, we can see that, which is obvious, falling down, right? So unemployment rate down from 2025. And then you've got the bond yields going up, right? And the bond yield increase in 2026 is likely more due to the inflationary risk, right? So that's where that's kind of looking. So it's pricing in kind of, you know, where yields will be, and it's concerned likely for the inflationary risk there, versus like the economic growth, right? So so that's probably where that's coming from. And then you've got this steady policy rate, you know, 2.75 that doesn't seem to be moving. And I think that's their lever as to what happens with inflation and growth. So overall, when I'm looking at this, what I'm seeing is definitely a slowdown in the economy with potential higher inflation that's coming. And that's all going to be driven, you know, that's primarily driven by the tariffs, right? So that's how important this topic is. I know people are bored and tired of it, but it's just something you got to keep a close eye on. It just has so much macroeconomic effect that trickles down. And really, like, I'm looking at now in terms of cities, you know, if I'm putting on my opportunistic hat and buying, like, you know, what cities are most affected by this tariff? Because this is gonna be it's gonna be around with us for a while, right? So we have to get used to it. You know, so which cities are more affected by the tariff?
Yeah, no, I actually
economic
find
impact.
this table to be interesting, and there's a lot of great insight here. And by the way, this just to clarify, this is talking Canada wide. This is a Canada wide data set here, right? Like we're looking
Yeah,
2024
GDP.
Canada GDP growth and
Yeah,
so forth to 27. And this is a good to look at here, and you can see one of the things like is, and you talked about this a lot of times, is the unemployment, right? Unemployment is a great indicator of the kind of one of those features that really determines the pulse of a country, also a region. And I would like to know what those are going to be from a region standpoint, from a provincial standpoint, from a city standpoint. But again, we're at 6.7. We can see that continue to decrease in 2026, which is, I think, is probably the like very positive. I mean, what would be like considered strong unemployment would be around 4%, right? Around 4% or so. So, I mean, we're still not there. But this seems to be the average, the going average across the years between 2024 and 2027. So hopefully that continues to go down, which can only mean well for, interest bonds interest, as well as the economy as a whole. So this is actually, I think this is probably one of the most positive aspects to this report that we're looking at here.
yeah, and remember, unemployment is, like you said, it's still quite high at in the 6 and 7s, so that's not necessarily good,
Yeah.
um, right? And it's a direct reflection of GDP, right? So if your country if your country's GDP is not ticking along at where it should be, between that 2 to 3% in Canada, right? That's our perspective.
That's right.
Other areas, it's much higher. Other countries, it's much higher. But if you're not ticking along, that's the first indicator you want to look at, because unemployment will be a result of that, right?
Great.
So yeah, so not once again, it's not all rosy. But now we're going to turn to just some interesting stats that happened in July, Montreal and Toronto specifically. So here we've got Montreal home sales up nearly 10% in July, as overbidding leads to price increases. Next step. So here we've got, listings throughout Montreal are up 9.2%. So we got more supply. And people came out to bid, it appears, and hence have increased prices. So a bit of an interesting phenomenon happening in Montreal, but it's not alone. If we look at the next slide, we see the same thing happening in Toronto in July. So July has had this effect, where it's typically summer, it's usually slower, a bit of activity. If we go to the next slide there, new condo market cools nationally, but some cities still heat up. So the condo market, this is interesting as well. So there seems to be a little bit of activity. I think I've got a chart here, with new condo. Yeah, here it is. Perfect. So once again, I circled Montreal and Toronto here, showing that, this is showing while the national average edged down, market performance by different regions were up. So Montreal led price growth among major cities by 2.9%. Toronto marginally 0.1, but that's good compared to what you're hearing in the news. So there seems to be a little bit of resurgence in the condo market, led by the regions in the major cities in Quebec. There's Edmonton, Victoria, and Toronto's there as well. So my overall take on all this is, people were sitting on the sidelines for a long time as a result of uncertainty, right? The tariff wars, really kind of stunted people, right? And I think what we saw in July is a bit of a knee-jerk reaction. We saw more listings come on, so therefore you have more supply. And those that are on the sidelines that were prepared and ready to buy probably got a nudge from their realtor. and jumped in and took advantage of opportunities. Will this continue? I don't think so. I don't think we'll see this continue. I think this is a bit of a short-term kind of knee-jerk reaction to the market and opportunities that came about as a result of more supply. But I don't think this is going to be continued. I don't think this is the rebound, given what I'm seeing on an economic perspective, from a macroeconomic perspective. So that's my take. I think you may see, a few months of this. Remember, the housing market always lags the overall economy, usually by 12 to 18 months. So you may see this kind of more exuberance as people are taking advantage of more listings, more opportunities, better prices, those that are ready to buy. But I think the real buying opportunities, according to the economic data, will come in 2026, if that's what you're searching for. So I think there's some a little bit more pain ahead, and like the cautionary tale of, really watch your strategies. This is not the time for flipping and exuberance. You've got to really have a long-term strategy, which you should always have a long-term strategy with real estate. This is not get rich quick or quick buck artists type of ordeal here. This is long-term wealth, long-term creating, really creating housing for people that need it. If you're building in the rental market, that's what it is, right? It's a long-term game.
Oh, that's great. I could appreciate this type and to your point, I don't think tariffs are factoring into some of these numbers as yet. Like it's just impossible for it to be factored in at this point. So probably in a quarter, 2 quarters from now, we will see what it is the impact of those tariffs will on buyers' sentiment. But to your point, buyers are coming back into the market because like this seems to be the bottom of the basin, right? It seems to be, but hopefully the bottom doesn't fall out further, right? Like that's the last thing that we need. But this is why I believe a lot of buyers are coming back, and this is as low as the market has been since 2020, 2016, it's somewhere around there, right?
Yeah, pre-COVID, yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I think I wouldn't say this is the bottom, but it's definitely a point where there's some exuberance, and you've seen buyers that are ready, and these buyers, like I'll point out, these buyers are ready, right? Like, these are not like, I don't think these are like coming out fresh. Like these buyers were sitting on the bench, they're ready, they already did their stretch, right? They were ready to buy, right? So I think you've just kind of seen them come off the bench, right?
I agree.
Take some action. But yeah, no. From that perspective, any final thoughts as we wrap this one up, Ron? Why don't you take us home here?
I guess this is basically the time when you get off the sideline, and you go elbows up on your purchasing, because if we're at the bottom or we're near the bottom, you don't want to buy too close to the bottom, right? You don't want to buy too far down there, because you never know what can happen. But Marcel, this is another great episode, man. I really think the listeners are getting a ton load of value. I want to say thank you guys for listening in. Please hit the thumbs up, hit the bell, subscribe to this content. This will help us to reach more people. But until then, leave us a comment. We'll be happy to respond to those comments with a video. We'll see you guys soon.
See ya.